It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. And Logan, we've been saying it's draft season. There is no more it's draft season than mock draft 1.0, which we are going to embark on today. Welcome everybody. Welcome one and all. It is most officially draft season.
Yeah, our first official mock draft. It kind of christens the draft season 100%. So looking forward to it. Again, this is still pretty early in the process. So a lot of this is still, no combine yet. That's a huge data point in terms of draft stuff. But it's always fun to get a preliminary one in and kind of, I think, help the fans kind of get a lay of the land with regards to where we think people are going to go and value at 29, basically.
For sure. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do three things today. One, we're going to talk a little bit about this draft in terms of what could be available at 29 and how much things can change. Two, we're going to actually simulate a mock draft. We're going to use PFF's mock draft simulator, which is actually, I think, very different than a lot of the mock drafts that are out there from draft analysts.
Sure.
Your Daniel Jeremiah's, your Bucky Brooks, your Field Yates's, et cetera. So we're gonna do one and see who's available around 29 for Washington, talk about some of those players, and then we're gonna scroll back up and say, hey, that's at that range. Maybe we would have considered a trade for that player. So that's how we're gonna operate this. But it's so many things are so different than a year ago, Logan. As you know, obviously the year ago, Jaden Daniels wasn't a Commander. Dan Quinn hadn't gone for it on a single fourth down. Like we hadn't done anything that we now associate with what it means to be a Commander. None of that had been established, and so they had the second pick. It was, if you had given me Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or the field, I probably would have taken Daniels or May and said, you can have the field. Maybe a little nervous about I think this was about the time that some of the McCarthy stuff started to bubble up. Like they really like him. Apparently they did. If Jaden wasn't there, that might have been their guy. But ultimately, we knew what direction they were going. They were drafting a quarterback. At the 29th pick, they could go a million different directions, and there was so much more variance ahead of them, because that's the other thing. They had a fake number one pick last year. We knew Caleb Williams was going one. We knew exactly who was going to be available. And I think what we're going to discover over the next 45 minutes, Logan, is we have no freaking idea who is going to be available. So falling in love with any single player seems like a very silly operation.
Yeah, silly operation, but I think that's ultimately draft season, right? Is that's part of the fun of it, is you do find people that you really like and you hope that the Commanders take there at that spot. But I think you're articulating that really well. Not only is there a lot of variance ahead of them, but when you're picking, 29, 30, 31, 32, it really is like a glorified second round pick. So value there becomes a little bit different than you would kind of say, oh, it's a top 10 pick. It's got to be kind of a blue chip guy, or it's a middle of the first round guy. We got to get a significant starter. It becomes like you're looking at probably a pool. This is probably a little bit excessive, but I'd say anywhere between 25 to 35 guys in that range, maybe even 40 of guys that you could reasonably pick at that spot. So, fans in years past, I think, have been like, oh, this is the pick, right? Or this is someone we should be looking at. When you're picking this late in the first round, it's drastically different. And so of those 40 guys, it's like, who is the best fit to be a Washington Commander? And I think, the other thing, I've said this on different shows too, is you're also looking into the second round because you're not picking again to the bottom of the second. So if there's a guy that you really absolutely love, but he's not going to be there when you're picking it, 60, whatever it is, 60, whatever.
Yeah. I don't even know.
You can select him at 29, and it might feel like a reach. The national media might say, oh, he's a second round player, but this is essentially a second round pick for you and your franchise. So really, in terms of draft logistics, draft strategy, this is going to be a much different conversation than it's been specifically last year with the Commanders, because the landscape's different. How the field's going to fall is totally different. So I'm kind of really excited because it allows us to talk about more people and more fitting more needs. Drafting best player available becomes a much different conversation here at 29.
For sure. So just to kind of put some numbers behind that, I am currently on Scouts Inc.'s draft board. The last player they have with a 90 or higher grade, which for them is a first round grade, is Benjamin Morrison, the corner out of Notre Dame.
Right.
That is their 21st ranked player. So when we talk about, oh, you're not getting a blue chip guy, like, of course you can. I've also got pulled up the history of the 29th pick. So I'll read off some names here in a second. But we're literally talking about who are your top of the second round guys. Now, with that said, you could get lucky. Jerzon Newton was a first round grade for Washington last year. They got him, at 36, I think it was. So it is very possible that someone that Adam Peters and his staff has a first round grade on is available at 29. And regardless of position, if he's the last first round grade you have left, you pretty much take that player. Unless it's like, oh, well, Shedeur Sanders has taken a tumble and they have a first round grade on him. They're not going to take Shedeur Sanders with the 29th pick. So quarterback is the one exception. But outside of quarterback, pretty much any player that they have a first round grade on, if that guy falls to 29, that's most likely the pick. But I think you could also maybe potentially find a trade partner. Like, really, what is the difference in picking 29th versus 35th? If, let's say, Shedeur Sanders does take a tumble, but there's a quarterback needy team that didn't like him at, in the top 5 that does want to take him and get that 5th year option. Okay, fine. That's your last first round guy on the board. You weren't going to take him because he's a quarterback. You have 20 guys in your next bucket. Moving down 6 spots and not having a first round pick is not that big of a deal if it allows you to pick up stuff in the future.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think it's important to understand, like, I think that's a really nice point you made there, like the 21st player. What was the service you were just citing?
Scout Sync. So that's ESPN scouting service.
Scout Sync, is the last first round grade. But you'll also find teams, this is usually not the case, but you will find teams that'll have, hey, I've got 30 players with a first round grade or 35 players with a first round grade. It is a subjective measurement of success. It's like, this is the thing about the draft. I had a conversation with a scout that I have a lot of respect for last year, and he was like, yeah, we do a big board. We go 1 to 300 and we rank everybody in order. The thing, and we say, oh, this is a weak draft. This is a strong draft. This is a deep draft. This is whatever. The problem is, in those 300 players, some of them will hit. Some of them will hit from the 5th round. Some of them will hit in the 4th round. Some will hit in the 2nd round. It's our job to identify those people based on things that we know. And every year there's a Puka Nacua, right? How did we miss on Puka Nacua? Why didn't we value him more? And I think that's where, like, that, again, that's a huge part of the draft process. That's exactly how you should do it. 1 to 100. These are the first round guys, second round guys, third round guys, but it doesn't shake out like that. Who is a draftable prospect that is going to be a good NFL pro? That is what you need to be thinking about. And you can find that guy in the 7th round. You can find that guy in the 1st round. And the expectations for those are very different because of the resource allocated to that. But I think that's important to understand. Like, just because this guy doesn't have a first round grade doesn't mean that he's not going to get in the right system with the right coach and be an absolute stud. And I think we'll hopefully be able to talk about that in a little bit more detail when we start talking about individual prospects.
For sure. But at the same time, you have to understand how everyone else thinks about players. Because if you can get a guy in the 5th that you are like, this guy is going to be awesome, but you can get him in the 5th and you waste a 3rd round pick on him, then you didn't waste the 3rd round pick, right? I think of a great example. Travis Frederick, the former Cowboys center, might go to the Hall of Fame. Most teams had like a 3rd round grade on him. Cowboys took him in the 1st. Was that a bad pick? I don't know. Could they have gotten him in the 2nd or the 3rd and gotten another quality player at that spot? Did they maximize their resources? So
see, this is where I think, I'm really glad you brought that up. This is where it's like, if you believe it, and this is where, like, you got to trust your draft board. If you believe that is 100% true, then it's not a wasted pick. Statistically, that's unlikely that you are that right against consensus. Statistically, that's not how it goes. But if you believe it and you trust it, like, that's not a miss.
And it also might be it takes one other team to have the same hunch that you did, right? If 28 teams thought Travis Frederick was just a standard center that you could take in the 3rd round, the Cowboys were like, this dude's going to be a Hall of Famer, and one other team did, and they took him in the 2nd. The Cowboys were trying to wait till the 3rd. Then you lost your Hall of Fame center. And so I'm sure there's a million scouts with a million stories about, like, I knew that guy and I tried to convince my GM. Like, that's a tale as old as time.
It's 100%. Like, think about Tim Tebow. I think about Tim Tebow all the time when it's draft season. It just takes one. It takes one team to think, I can take this guy and make him the thing. And then you miss a guy that you really like. And Tim Tebow, I don't think a lot of teams really like, but he went in the 1st round because they loved him. And it just takes one team in 32 to be like, I think Frederick is a great example, is a 2nd round pick or a 1st round pick. And maybe the team after Dallas is picking takes him. And then all of a sudden they're having the conversation. They have a Hall of Fame center. So I think that's where it's such a subjective thing. that you really have to. That's the one thing I loved about Adam Peters last year. There was a very clear vision for the draft class and the type of person you're bringing in. And when you have that, you could just go back to being process driven. Like, this is our process. It's going to hit more times than not. We're going to miss on a couple guys here and there, but as long as we trust our process and trust our vision, we're never having like bad picks because they all kind of fit in the cultural identity of the team, if that makes sense.
And if they don't have a commander's tag, especially in those early rounds, we're not taking them. So we're not going to get distracted by, Mel Kiper's on TV yapping about this guy. The guy's not got a tag that we said this is what fits our franchise. We don't care what they think. That's not a guy for us. And so I think that's really important. Just real quick, last but not least, on this kind of overview portion of the show here. Here's the recent history of the 29th pick. You ready for this?
I can't wait for this, actually.
All over the place. All right, I'll read the first 5. We'll go back to 2020. Last year, Tyler Guyton. The year before, Brian Brzee. Cole Strange, Patriots guard. Eric Stokes, Packers DB. Isaiah Wilson, Titans tackle. Those are the last 5 number 29 overall
really
picks.
Bad. Isaiah Wilson, bad. Stokes, not great. The kid, he was from Florida, right? Number 29.
Which
it was
kid?
the DB from
no, Stokes was from Georgia.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So again, like and I think that just embodies the draft perfectly. I think if you were to pick any pick, even the first pick overall, and go through them, you'd probably have a couple who were like, ooh, that wasn't very good, right? It's the nature of the draft, right? It's the nature of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There's no, and we are getting smarter. We're getting more analytical with how we analyze these prospects and these positions and risk and upside and all those types of things. But you're always going to have a very checkered, history of every pick in the NFL draft. So,
and the lower you go, the more checkered it gets, which is why you want, in theory, a higher pick. Although, if you have a higher pick, it means you had a worse season typically. So there's that. But that's why, like, if you're not good, you want the pick. Oh, what's the difference between the 8th and the 5th pick? You hit more often at 5 than you do at 8. Just some other, the previous, 8 or 9, because you get to a couple good names down here. 2019 was LJ Collier, Taven Bryan, David Njoku was the Browns pick at 29 in 2017. Man, talk about a different Robert Kimdichie. Remember him?
Yeah.
Number 1 overall prospect going into Ole Miss, had a terrible time there, and the Cardinals took a flyer in the first round. That didn't work out. Philip Dorsett, Dominique Easley, and then you got a couple of really good ones. Cordero Patterson in 2013, and Harrison Smith was the 29th pick in 2012, still playing safety for the Vikings. So there's definitely some hits, some misses. Nick Mangold in 2006, one of the best centers of the century. So there's definitely some guys that were really good, some obvious busts, some guys who had some in-between careers, some a guy like Hakeem Nicks who was super up and down for the Giants as a receiver. So that's the history of the 29th pick.
No, I think that's great. I think if you trust your process and you trust the right, trust your process, I think you could end up with a really good football player here. And even just going through some mock draft stuff yesterday, kind of getting ready for this show, it's like, man, there's players here that I really like. Are there issues with them? Yes. But would I love to coach these players based on their film? Yeah. And I think that's ultimately what you got to kind of rest on here. It's like, you might not be able to find, the blue chipper of the blue chippers, but you can find a guy who's going to be a good NFL football player with upside. And I think that's the thing, is like, the Harrison pick is great. Like, who would have thought at 29 he would have been the guy he is now? It's just, he's self-motivated. He works hard. He's physical. And it just developed the right way and the right system with the right coaches. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is trying to make sure we get the right person that fits in our culture and our identity, and make sure that hits long-term for us.
For sure. And just for kicks and giggles here, because they have in this chart that I'm looking at the 29th pick of the other rounds as well, some of the guys who have come out and in 29th pick of the second round, you had Taylor Rapp, DJ Chark, Christian Fulton, Eddie Lacy, who obviously is super up and down, but he's a guy that had a bunch of really good years. In the third round, Wanye Morris was a couple years ago for the Chiefs, where they missed on that pick. But Spencer Brown, the tackle for the Bills, Jacoby Brissett was actually that pick. So T.Y. Hilton in 2012,
There's
Cliff
good football.
Averill, Cliff Averill, 2008,
players,
who was awesome with Dan in Seattle when he eventually got there. So yeah, I mean, there's good football players up and down, but there's your brief history of the 29th overall pick / 29th overall, or 29th picks in each round. As for the 29th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, Logan Paulsen, let's see in our first mock draft who the Washington Commanders would take with it if we were in charge. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here on Take Command. And we have, for the first time, for those watching on YouTube, pulled up the War Room, Logan. Oh, I missed it. I missed it so much.
Here we are.
Here we are. Our boxes got smaller, and then there's a giant mock draft simulator up to our right, and on it, the Tennessee Titans are about to be on the clock. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm just going to hit start draft, and we've got it on fast mode, so it's going to quickly go through, and we're going to go to the Commanders pick first. We're going to discuss the names that are left on the board, and we're ultimately going to settle on one because that's how a mock draft works. But really, this is much more about the discussion, as we were just talking about. The combine is such a huge data point. All these boards are going to shake up massively a week from now or 2 weeks from now once we're through the combine and some of the reporting comes out on different medicals and all this kind of stuff. So this is as preliminary gets, but it's still worth doing. And it's fun. And who doesn't like fun? So, Logan, should I hit the magic button? Are you ready? Or anything else you would like to?
No, let's do
you're
it.
like, hit the button, dude. And here we go. Wow, that's going so fast. So fast. Down it goes. There goes another player. Okay, and we're on 29. And the last 5 picks are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Armin Membo from Missouri, the tackle, went at 24 to Minnesota. Darius Alexander, interior defensive lineman from Toledo, goes 25 to Houston. Gray Zabel, tackle from North Dakota State, goes to the Rams. Nick Scorton, edge from Texas A&M, goes to Baltimore. And Jahad Campbell, who had been available in all the previous versions of this that I did, the linebacker from Alabama, goes 28 to Detroit, which leaves Washington on the clock. According to PFF's rankings, here are the best players available. But Logan, obviously, if you want to look at some position specific, we can go scrolling.
Yeah, I think just go through these. These are interesting to look at for sure.
Shamar Stewart, the edge from Texas A&M, is the top player available on PFF's board, also based off average draft position in all of these mocks. He is their 22nd ranked player. Josh Connerly, Jr., the tackle from Oregon. Colston Loveland, really interesting name, tight end from Michigan. Jalen Walker, linebacker from Georgia. Demetrius Knight, linebacker, South Carolina. Trey Amos and Siobhan Ravel, cornerbacks from Mississippi and Eastern Carolina specifically. And then the last name that I will read in terms of just players available, Donovan Ezaraku, the edge from Boston College. So those are the top names available on PFF's board. But I think something we learned from doing this last year with PFF is sometimes it's worth clicking on the positions and going through because they might have a player ranked way lower than you, and that's a guy that you would take. So first,
well, let's just talk through those
crop.
Let's just talk through those guys right there. So first off, I think if you're a Commanders fan and you like football and you like good football players, if those first 3 guys are available, like Shamar Stewart, based on my current rankings, is my second edge. So for him,
so you would be sprinting the card in.
So I'd be like, absolutely. He's 6'6", he's 285, he runs well, he finishes hard. Like, I have my little Commanders box of guys just based on film that I think are Commanders players. He, to me, is 100% a Commanders player. He's a guy that didn't have a ton of production at A&M. I think he had 1.5 sacks the last 2 years, so 1.5 sacks in 23 and 1.5 sacks in 24. But a guy that when you watch him at the Senior Bowl, when you watch him move, he's just built different. He's physical. He has inside-outside flexibility. He's tough as nails. Like, he's a special football player. He's a special athlete. And I think the intensity and the passion that he brings are really tremendous. So if he's available here, which I do not think he will, and I think when you look at Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft, he doesn't think he will be. When you look at Dane Brugler's big board, he doesn't think he'll be here. But if this can happen, something like this can happen. Let's say he's got a weird medical. People are spooked by the production. The frame, the physicality, the finish, the mindset here, to me, is 100% a Commanders football player. I think you jump all over that. The next player, and then this is the conversation they'd have in the war room. So I love him. Right?
Yes.
I also love Josh Connerly, right? Just
real quick, Shamar Stewart on Dane Brugler's big board, 9th overall player.
Yeah. He's a freak. So this seems exceedingly unlikely, but if it is happening, then I'm really excited because I think he's a good ball player. Josh Connerly, I think, is a more realistic selection here for the Commanders. He feels like a guy, again, really good athlete, kind of plus athlete, moves well, lacks a little bit of the ideal size. I think he weighed in at the Senior Bowl at 315, looked a little bit like there was some water weight involved there. I think he's probably around 305, but moves well, good physicality, very technically sound. Obviously, everyone's going to remember the play where he gets blown up by Mike Green from Marshall from the Senior Bowl. But outside of that, he's incredibly consistent. And he's a guy that I do feel like, based on height, I think he's 6'5", weight 315, arm length 34 inches, hits all the measurables, technically sound, can move in space, not the top shelf athlete of like a Trent Williams, but definitely has enough athleticism to play tackle in the NFL. I think that would give you the opportunity to move Brandon Coleman inside and really just increase the consistency of that group.
So you'd be drafting him as a left tackle, not as a Andrew Wiley right tackle replacement.
I think he could do both, but I would probably start him there. I think because he played left tackle in college, he's got, again, that athleticism, that frame. Again, he's got to grow into it a little bit, but that's pretty tremendous. And so I just want to also talk about the third guy on this list, Colston Loveland. This is really interesting to me because he is maybe, let me think about the pass catchers that I've done. So Travis Hunter, the kid from Arizona, I forget his name, Warren, and then Golden maybe, and then him. So he's my fourth or fifth pass catcher that I would select here. And when you watch him, man, he is exactly what you want at the modern NFL tight end, right? He's the modern NFL HF move guy. He can play in the slot. He can play a little bit in line, but he's a mismatch weapon in the pass game. And I think about him learning for a year or kind of rotating snaps with Zach Ertz for a year. And I am like, this is a piece you could build an offense around for the next 10 years. I don't think he gets past, honestly, Denver, or I also don't think he gets past the Chargers, because I think the Chargers with Harbaugh, they know him. They'd probably draft him. However, if he's here, this is maybe the best pass catcher on the board at this point. He's a mismatch weapon inside. You can line him up and play a little bit of isolation basketball with him. He tracks the ball well. He's got great flexibility in the upper body. I would love if you picked any one of these three guys, I'd be ecstatic. But Shamar Stewart, again, he's not going to be here. Very unlikely to me, but that to me is the pick. But any one of these three you feel great about. And then also the two DBs that are here are great. They're very Dan Quinn type guys, right? It's Trey Amos
and Siobhan Ravel.
Taller guys, good length, good speed. Again, they play with the right kind of physicality, the right kind of aggressiveness, right? They've got good speed. So if you're looking to get more dynamic there, again, this is, I think, a really good illustration. I don't necessarily agree with these rankings by PFF, but there's going to be a good football player here, someone that you feel really excited about. It might not be Shamar Stewart good, and it might not be Colston Loveland good, but if you were to get a Connerly or one of these, or Trey Amos or Ravel, I think you do a backflip and you say, hey, this is pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing, is it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder in the draft. And so there's going to be an option available that they like, or there might be multiple. And this is the kind of thing too, is at this point, let's see what the little trade bubble is here.
You could
Kansas City,
for sure get a trade candidate here for sure.
Yeah. If I can pick up, okay, we'll trade 29 for 31. I know my owner will veto it. Can I get? Oh, they don't have a lot of draft picks. Can I get their second rounder next year if I give them, I don't know, something this year? We can finagle with the trades or whatever. But if I can pick up an extra pick and move down 2 spots, nevertheless, although trading with Kansas City has proven kind of dangerous. I'm like, who does Kansas City want here? They want the fastest guy in the draft, Xavier Worthy, last year, and the Bills kind of regret that one. But ultimately, if you got that many dudes.
Can we look at O-line real quick? O-line and D-line.
I was going to say, I think we should look at O-line. I think we should look at edge, because if Stewart's very unlikely to be available, who are the edges that might be?
And I also would like to look at guard too, just to kind of, if that's possible.
Of course. Here's the tackles. You got Connerly, and then you got Ursery from Minnesota.
Donovan Jackson's probably going to play guard, and if you draft him as a guard, I think he'd be a really interesting selection for the Commanders. He played left guard in college. He's 6'5", he's 330. He played left tackle when Josh Simmons went out with a knee injury. Josh Simmons is my 1A tackle with Will Campbell, really good football player.
Ton of experience. Got almost let's see. Geez, he's got almost 2,000 snaps at guard in college.
Yeah, he's a pro's pro, man. He's a guy that you feel like you could just plug and play, got the frame, can upgrade right away if you need him to, played a lot of ball, and he's got that competitive mindset. Like, I love the fact that he switched from left guard to left tackle and really kind of let them make a run for the playoffs. You know what I mean? I think that's something that you really stick at. Oh, dude, Tyler Booker's on the board. Like, holy cow. Like, so Tyler Booker in most mock drafts that you read is a top 15 player. I think he's 6'6". Can you look up his height real quick? I think he's 6'6", 360. And, like an AMG or IMG Academy guy, that weight's wrong.
6'5", 325 is the listed weight here. But, yeah, we'll see what he weighs in at. And that's the fun of if we did this a week from now or maybe 2 weeks from now, once we get through all the testing and all the medicals and all the everything at the combine, is we're going to have some different looking numbers on some of these guys.
Yeah, and we talked about kind of the offensive linemen that the Commanders are looking for. And watching Tyler Booker, watching Jackson, both those guys at guard feel like they're Commanders player. They've got a little bit more lower body density to them. They've got a little bit more snap to them. They can pull. They're not great outside zone players, but the Commanders don't run a lot of outside zones. So I think I don't think Booker will be there. Jackson very well might be. But those two football players are excellent. There are inconsistencies to Booker's game, but I think you're betting on a little bit of upside there because the frame, the movement skills, it's all there. I was talking to a scout at the Senior Bowl, and they said, "Oh, I think he weighs 360." Like, that was the weight they had from the school. So again, like, that's kind of what I'm projecting. So you got a big body guy, good arm length, moves well. Like, that's exactly what you want. Jackson, same type of thing. They feel like they would upgrade the offensive line immediately. And I know guard isn't necessarily the sexiest selection, but at 29. Doesn't matter. Like, positional value becomes less important. That's why, like, drafting a tight end, you feel really good about it. You feel good about it. In
some ways, it works in reverse. Like when you get later in rounds, because it's like everyone else is devaluing this player because of the position they play, but they're actually just better.
Yeah,
and I get it, right? Tight end is so silly. The market on the free agent. The free agent list, and the running back in a way too, right? Like Saquon, it's like, oh my God, the Eagles paid him $13 million, and think about what that felt like when they paid him that versus what it feels like now when he just led them to a Super Bowl. But like, who else signed for $13 million last year in free agency?
I don't know.
Darnell Mooney.
Oh yeah, wow. That's
so
crazy.
Like the wide receiver market, like there is a legitimate chance that De'Ami Brown, if he leaves, especially, signs for more money than Zach Ertz.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100%
Zach
right.
was probably a top 10 tight end last year based off his production, and De'Ami Brown was a rotational piece who had two really nice playoff games. I like De'Ami a lot as a dude, as a player, as the whole deal, but like there's no way in value to the Commanders' offense that De'Ami Brown should be getting paid more money than Zach Ertz. Like, that's crazy. But the wide receiver and the tight end markets are so whack that if you can draft these guys and get similar production to a De'Ami Brown without having to pay him $12 million a year, that is huge versus like, okay, you sign Zach Ertz, let's say it's to $10 million, and Colson Loveland, how much of a discount are you really getting there? Like, it's just not as significant. So like the positional value stuff is real, but eventually drafting good football players is how you win Super Bowls. And you shouldn't overthink it. You shouldn't play too spreadsheet football, and you should think about playing actual football. And that's where a guy like Loveland becomes a heck of a value because he's the 14th best player that you could get at 29, let's say. As for the edge guys, beyond Stewart, Ezeraku, who we talked about a little bit, we mentioned Landon Jackson, the edge out of Arkansas. Princely, man, I got to get on my name game this year.
Princely Umanyala.
Uman Yellen from Mississippi, Jack Sawyer, and then Tuamalo from Ohio State. So those are probably the top guys.
Really good edge players in that group. Like I mentioned on the Ticket to the Draft podcast that I do for the Commanders, like Landon Jackson might be my favorite player in the draft. And again, he's just a hard-nosed, physical Commanders type player. Ezeraku's the same thing, man. Like great pass rush upside, little undersized, 6'2", kind of that 245 type range. But dude, Landon Jackson is an absolute unit. Like he plays hard. He just plays every down like he's dying, and I love it. And I can't get enough of it. He's not the most bendy. He's not the, most flexible guy. All his pass rushes are like they're either like inside move wins or they're like just hustle plays. Like I was watching him versus LSU, and it's just like here's 60 plays of just a car accident. And and again, like he's 280, like, and he's 6'7", like you don't see dudes that big play that hard. So again, Shamar Stewart to me, again, is up on the board just because he's a little better athlete, but Landon Jackson, love him. Ezra Rocco, if you want to see a guy just win in a multitude of ways from a pass rush standpoint, Princely Umanyalan is special. He has the ability to be a special pass rusher, a little inconsistent with the effort, but I think what this is showing from a draft perspective is like, I don't know if these guys will be available when they're picking at the end of the second round, but there is a runway of edges here that are pretty good football players and I think would be great additions to the Washington Commanders, no doubt. So, it's interesting talking about edge. I think we should probably talk about wide receiver and maybe cornerback too, but like maybe linebacker, but like, gosh, like that edge group gets me fired up that those guys are still on the board and really, really good football players.
All right. So let's hit wide receiver then. Alec Oyamanor from Stanford, Jack Beck from TCU. Xavier Restrepo from Miami, Jaden Higgins, Iowa State. So it feels like the wide receivers.
Oh, dude, Savion Williams. Holy cow. Okay.
Savion Williams. They've got him as the 80th ranked player, average draft position 60. So we're talking Washington's second round pick, maybe.
So let's talk
where this is going right now.
Let's talk through this a little bit. Okay. So, so Savion Williams is, if there's one guy that is not in your top group of guys. So what's the guy's name from Arizona? I keep forgetting his name.
Keep talking and I'll get it for you.
But the
Tretoria McMillan.
Yeah, McMillan. So he's like maybe the true X in my opinion this year. Like he's special. I think I actually, like, the more I think about it, I was comparing my notes to last year. Like I like him better than like Roma Dunze, I think. And that's a hot take. Chill out. It's still early in the process. But like when I watch his film, his movement skills, the way he tracks the football, there's just something special. He's a true X. Everybody else is a little bit like, there's like a little bit of like a slash. Like they could play X in certain situations, but like Golden, for example, reminds me a little bit of Antonio Brown, right? Like he can win from multiple spots. He doesn't lose any speed out of the cut. So could you play him at X? Yeah, but he's 5'10", 200 pounds. So you're like, I don't know. Xavion Williams is 6'3" 3/4. He's 225 pounds.
They've got him listed at 6'5".
Yeah, I don't think he was measured that tall, but he is a absolute physical freak. He plays running back at TCU. He plays wildcat quarterback at TCU. He runs with violence. He's got this ability to throw his foot in the ground. He has just recently kind of transitioned to wide receiver, and he's got the suddenness. He's got the ability to run over top. Doesn't track the ball super well, so still like learning the receiver stuff, which is why he's down there. But from an athlete standpoint, I'm like, that dude is special, right? And so if you picked him at 60, I'd be like, great. Because I think about adding offensive juice to an offense, right? You can play running back. We talked about getting more explosive at the running back position. He can play receiver. He can catch bubble screens. And he runs with such physicality. He reminds me of, God dang it, we just mentioned his name, Patterson from...
Cordell Patterson. Yeah.
They feel very similar. I think he's got a little bit more route running upside, which gets me really excited about him. But that's kind of the player I see there. You got Jaden Higgins on this list, who reminds me a little bit of Drake London. Like maybe not as physical, but has that kind of silky smooth double stick, can win in the slot, can win outside. Great complementary piece to our guy Terry McLaurin. Illuminor is kind of that. He's the closest thing on here outside of those two guys I just talked about to being a true 2. He's a little stiff, but he can win 50-50 balls. Limited route tree at Stanford. 6'2", like 215, something like that.
Yeah.
But
210 on PFF's listing.
Yeah, but that kind of big physicality. So if you were to take him at 29, I don't hate it. I think there's better football players at other positions at this point, but that's an interesting guy. Jack Beck is an absolute maniac. Like, talk about a Commander's tag. Like, that is a Commander's football player. He's tough. He's physical. He'll block. He'll do everything you want. He's not the fastest guy. He's actually a converted tight end. Converted from tight end to wide receiver, funny enough. Unusual transition there.
Yeah.
But
the old Oppo switch show.
I love watching him play football. I love him. Now, does he have enough vertical juice to be a true, like, difference-making outside receiver? Combine will be interesting for him. Kind of a slot guy. And then you got your guy from Miami there. I forget his name.
Restrepo.
Restrepo, who is like your kind of like slot specialist, really dynamic mover in the slot. But there are some interesting playmakers. But I think just looking at the edge rushers, like, I was juiced to take probably 5 guys at 29 there. There's probably one guy I would take at 29 there and feel kind of icky about it. Offensive lineman, there's 2 guards I would immediately take. There's a tackle I would take. There's a lot of really good football players at those other positions, kind of at 29 for value. And then corner, man, I love some of these corners. Like Siobhan Ravel, like I love him. I've only watched a couple like cut-ups of him, but
Would you take him at 29?
I probably would. Like I'd probably take those defensive linemen and the tackles first.
Right. Like when I say you take him at 29, like when we ultimately make our pick here, I think it's going to be Stewart. But like if he's the best, like if he's the best player on the board, you're not like, dang, that's all we got left with. Like you're psyched.
Even Benjamin Morrison, like he's a little stiffer, but like
I was gonna say, Scouts Inc. that was the guy we just talked about. Scouts Inc. has had them as their 21st player, and they're a first round, like a legit 90 first round grade on him.
Yeah. So the more we go through this, the more I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot of good football players here at 29, and guys that are going to make your team significantly better. It's just about identifying which dude you feel like. What is that? Azarihe? How do you say that name?
I think it's just Azariah Thomas.
Azariah Thomas was an absolute maniac at the Senior Bowl. Maniac. And he's the 88th player on the board, right? Like, there's some good defensive backs here that have the size, length measurements you want. So I'm juiced. I've seen people have him in the first round. He's the 88th player on the PFF board, right? 88th player. And I think Daniel Jeremiah has him going 20 or something in his recent mock draft. Like, there is a lot of discrepancy, a lot of parity in this draft right now, on the boards right now at this time of the year. But man, I'm like, dude, let's get this done. Like, how about running backs? Well, let's just for fun, let's go to running backs, man. Because are there more good football players? Probably.
Cam,
they had Cam Scatterbo from
Arizona State, Sampson from Tennessee, Johnson from Iowa, Henderson and Judkins from Ohio State. I saw a draft the other day that had Henderson in the first round.
That's what I'm saying. Like right now we're in total, like no combine. Nobody's talked to scouts. It's crazy. But I will say it's interesting. In this draft, they've had 2 running backs get drafted in the first round. Hampton and obviously our guy, Genty. So interesting. And I do think that, and again, if you're a Commanders fan, you want a running back, like look at these names, 51, 58, all these guys down, Simpson, Scatterbo, Johnson. They're all good football players. Like they're all these guys, even, Damian Martinez, like don't worry about picking up a running back. Like these are all starting players. Keep going down. Like there are 20 of them. Like the kid from Michigan. Yeah. Mullings is a good power back. Etienne, great pass catching back, right? Like we're in what number?
Some people that really like Jordan James.
Dude,
I think Dane is big on Jordan James. He's like, last year when I was watching him and Bucky Irving, I like James better.
That's what I'm saying. Like there are a ton of really good football players at running back. Like the top is good. Like this is the funny thing about this draft. And I'll say this probably 40 times before we get to the draft. The positions that are not very valuable are very good in this draft. So like running back, there's a ton of them. Tight end, there's a ton of them. Like, so maybe that affects your ability to, I don't know, like mortgage picks differently. Like maybe you take your edge rusher here. Maybe you take your offensive tackle here at 29 because the back and the tight end will be there later. I don't know, but it is an interesting conversation for sure.
All right. So with all that, any of these linebackers you want to talk about real quick?
Dude,
we can talk about some guys. Logan, this is only 1.0. Like we got time, bro. But if there's any of these guys that jump out,
I don't. So like Carson Schlesinger from UCLA, what was that guy? Demarius Knighton from. I don't think he'll go that
Demetrius
high.
Knight, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Demetrius Knight. But those 2 guys are really interesting. I do think Schlesinger might be a first round pick. Just based on the early buzz, he moves well, good instincts. Reminds me a little bit like Kiko Alonso. Demetrius Knighton is big. He's like 240. Lacks a little bit of coverage instinct, but good arm length, can play a little on the edge, like physical dude. So, I mean, shoot, man. Like, we're talking good ball players here. There's a lot of them. And so I'm not taking a linebacker here probably. Maybe the kid from UCLA. The one linebacker I would take, I think he went the pick before. He went
Jahad Campbell.
Jahad Campbell. He moves really well, good flexibility, good hip movement. I want to watch him take on blocks more just to get a feel for the physicality. But the movement skills really jump out to you as a guy that could be absolutely devastating at the next level in terms of in the mold of like a Zach Bond or a Fred Warner, like that type of guy that can cover and run and blitz a little bit. So some good football players for sure.
All right, let's make the pick. Officially, Commanders take command mock draft 1.0. The card has been in for 25 minutes at this point, but we were just having some fun chatting because this is a podcast and the conversation's the point, not the draft. I think that's something that we should remember, boys and girls, as we move towards the actual draft. The point on the podcast is the conversation. However, 25 minutes ago, we were like, yeah, if Shamar Stewart's there, done. He's a Commander. He's a freak. There's no way he's going to be here. Dane Brugler's got him in his top 10 players of the entire thing. So we go Shamar Stewart here?
Yeah, I think Daniel Jeremiah had him in top 10 also. So, yeah, he's the guy. He's the guy I would pick here, 100%.
Shamar Stewart, stay in your seat. We got an A+ from PFF. Hey! Excellent work out of us.
Oh, God.
All right, when we get back, we will scroll up a little bit, see if there's any names that we think might actually be available for Washington, and based off where they got drafted, is there anybody that we would have potentially explored a trade for? Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, now in the post-draft recap room. Oh, I missed this one too, Logan. We're out of the war room. We graduated. We have a full first round. Just to run it down, this is a super interesting draft, and you know, you and I were talking before we got back into it here. Like, imagine me telling you this time last year that Michael Penix was going to be the 8th pick, or some of the other stuff that happened, that Joe Alt would go where he did, to the Chargers. Like I guess Harbaugh really loves linemen, but like, think of how much of a shock that felt like at the time. And so I think that it's worth saying, like, this is very different than a lot of the mock drafts that are out there currently, but this absolutely could be how things go down. Travis Hunter first to the Titans, Cam Ward to the Browns, Abdul Carter the edge to New York. Man, that would stink. Having to see him twice a year. Mason Graham, defensive lineman from Michigan to the Patriots. McMillan, the wide receiver to the Jags. God, they would have him and Brian Thomas Jr. If Trevor Lawrence can't figure it out with them and old Liam Cohen, then might actually be on Trevor Lawrence. Malachi Starks from Georgia to the Raiders. Luther Burden III. I was watching a little bit of him this morning. He's got big Curtis Samuel vibes.
Yeah, can we talk about him real quick? So he's a guy that I think is really interesting in this draft because he was really productive in 23, not as productive in 24, and looked like, I don't want to say not good, but just not effective. And he had bad quarterback play, but he's a guy that I could feel teams being either this high on based on his 23 film, or he could be a guy that I honestly could see being available when the Commanders are picking at 29. Like, so
he's all over the place in mock drafts, like,
and
truly all over the place.
And it's because of the inconsistency. Like, when you watch his 24, it's I'm going to say lukewarm. Like, he's an explosive player, but is he a difference-making player to go in the top 10? That's an interesting one. And him and the next guy too, James Pierce Jr. So James Pierce Jr. is my 6th edge, and I could easily see him going here because he is insane. He is insanely explosive, but a little up and down with effort this year. So if he were to slide a little bit, he's an interesting guy. Like, obviously you're not trading for him at 8, but let's say he's at 28 or 27. And you need an elite pass rusher, a guy that, and Shamar Stewart, assumingly, is not on the board, you might want to trade up for him in that kind of role. Like, really an interesting prospect for sure.
For sure. So he's going to Carolina at 8. Jahdae Barron, corner from Texas, to the Saints at 9. Ashton Genty goes 10 to the Bears. Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State, goes to Kyle Shanahan as his new toy at 11. Another dagger in the division. Will Campbell, arguably the best O-lineman in this draft, goes 12th to the Cowboys. He's probably playing guard there. I've heard a couple people say, like, they're not even bothering with him at tackle, that he's a straight guard for them.
So it's interesting. Like, I was one of those guys for a long time, and then I think you talk about elite traits, you know, his balance is special. And if he can, I might let him fail at tackle just to see, but he's a super smart player with like plus balance. So I might give it a shot, but I definitely see the guard transition for him because his arms, and again, if he measures fine at the combine, he's probably okay, but I think he's probably got 32-inch arms.
Walter Nolan, defensive lineman from Ole Miss, to the Dolphins at 13. Josh Simmons, who we'll circle back to in a second, Goes 14 to the Colts. Will Johnson, 15 to the Falcons, the corner out of Michigan. Mike Green, the edge out of Marshall, 16 to Arizona. So that's the first half of the first round. It'd be basically impossible for not impossible. I don't think it's worth it for Washington to trade back up into the top half of the first round. It is going to be very expensive for them to do so. We're talking giving up your third, or depending where you're going, maybe even your second pick to get up here. And that feels like a no-go. But Josh Simmons is a guy that you are absolutely in love with. And if he can fall past that point where maybe we're talking about, I don't know, would you trade 29 in your third rounder, which again is a higher third rounder from Miami, to go up to, I don't know, 20 to get Josh Simmons? Is that too rich for you? Or would you say like, no, we're good. We'll see who else can fall. But if it gets down to a fourth or fifth rounder, now we're talking.
Yeah, so he's an interesting guy because the knee injury, like I think there's a lot of flexibility in terms of where he goes. Like if he's healthy the whole year, I personally think he's a top 5 pick. I think he's the first offensive lineman off the board. He has the special athleticism. Like he looks like he wears 71. He looks like Darisaw from Minnesota. He looks a little bit like Trent Williams. Like he's got that elite first step quickness. He's got the ability to sink and bend. So in terms of tackle, like he's a guy. And so when you're hunting for special, like he's got the special, right? There are some other guys that I like later, but they're not. He's the guy to me, right? And so I would definitely consider it. Now, the only reason I would consider it is I do think he's getting more and more hype. People are getting more and more comfortable with the knee injury. But let's say, for example, a lot of teams don't clear him medically, and he slips into that 20 to 25 range. I'm definitely kicking the tires on something like that, right? I'm definitely kind of saying, hey, like, what's it going to take? And if it's a first and a fourth, I'm not even batting an eye. If it's a first and a third, I really got to trust my medical team. I got to trust my really everything. Trust medical, trust my coaches, right? Trust the vision for him. But in terms of athlete, like that's the guy that I've circled as like, we talked about Will Campbell maybe moving a guard. Like Josh Simmons is to me a special
tackle,
is a special offensive lineman in this draft. Yeah.
All right.
And then Mike, can we talk about Mike Green real quick? Just Mike Green.
Sure.
He's another guy that from Marshall might not go this high. He's my third edge at the moment. I could see him slipping because of level of competition, but his film is absolutely bonkers. So he's a guy that I can see has the ability potentially to be a plus pass rusher. Now, just going through this, you forget how saturated this is. Like you've got Abdul Carter, you got James Pierce Jr., you got Mike Green, you've got Shamar Stewart. There's Michael Williams is another guy that is tremendous, right? So maybe you don't feel like you need to reach on those guys because outside of Abdul Carter, I think those other guys are really clustered very closely together. And we just talked about when we previewed the edge we were picking, like there's some other guys after that. So maybe you don't need to trade up for him. But if you fall in love with him and his film is the stuff that makes you fall in love with a player, might not be a bad idea to kick the tires on that.
Yeah, if he falls to 25 and you can trade a 7th rounder or a 6th rounder to move up 4 spots, like that becomes a possibility. Or even if you trade a 4th but you get a 6th back and stuff like that. Those are the kind of deals that get made around there. All right, back half of the first round, just to round it out, Kenneth Grant from Michigan goes to the Bengals at 17. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State goes to Seattle. Kelvin Banks, tackle from Texas, goes 19 to Tampa. Where are you at on Banks?
I'm up and down on Banks. I think he's got good athleticism. I kind of feel guard from him quite a bit. But again, I probably let him fail at tackle, depending on the arm length measurement. And hopefully you guys can hear it in my discussion of these offensive linemen. Definitely not the same class as last year. We're like the 5th guy is Amarius Mims and is for sure going to be a starting tackle in the NFL. We're on our 3rd guy of the 3 in the top. There's one that I'm very confident will play tackle. The other 2, I could easily see switching to guard. So this is kind of a tackle poor class. And I also think that's one of the reasons where I like Connerly, for example, from Oregon, is a good prospect. Like, and even the kid from Missouri, Ahmad Membu, I think is a good tackle, but is probably a better guard. So like you see guys like Josh Simmons and Connerly becoming more valuable in this class if you need a tackle. But I like him. I don't love him. There's some technical things that bother me with him. But again, I think the athlete's there. I think the mindset's there. And if you were to slide a little bit, maybe you move up for him. But again, I'm not as shot in the ass with him as I am with like Josh Simmons, for example.
Amarion Hampton, halfback from UNC, goes 20 to Denver. Derek Harmon, defensive lineman from Oregon, goes 21 to Pittsburgh. Michael Williams, the edge from Georgia, to the Chargers at 22. Matthew Golden, wide receiver, Texas, Green Bay, 23, because they need another young wide receiver. They don't have enough of them. Armand Membu, the tackle from Mizzou, 24 to the Vikings. Would you be kicking the tires on trying to trade up for him, or is he too much in like the same Brandon Coleman kind of vibe where it's like, is it really worth giving up? Like, it's one thing if he falls to you at 29 to give up another, later lottery ticket and another player. Is that a guy that you would be willing
So
to do
he's
that
interesting to me because he's probably my top guard with like Tyler Booker and Jackson. They're kind of clustered very closely together for me. And so with neither one of those other guys off the board, I'd probably be okay not doing it. But let's say, for example, Booker goes early and he's there. I think he could be special. Like, he's got great strength, great bend, great explosive. I mean, he's 335 pounds, man.
Yeah,
and
Dane loves him. Dane's got him, I think, as his eighth player.
Yeah, he's a really good football player. I think the only thing that keeps me from like being like yes is just his effort is a little bit up and down. And I think a little bit of that's the offense stylistically. But I think if he interviews well, you could easily see him going top 10. You know what I mean? Like, that's like where like Tyler Booker, I know he was available when the Commanders were picking in 29 in this mock. If he interviews well, if Amon Membu, interviews well, like, there's no chance you're getting them because like teams are going to fall in love with those guys.
Darius Alexander from Toledo, 25. Zabel, tackle from
real quick. Yeah. That guy, maniac.
Alexander.
Yeah, if you're looking for like a good guy with inside-outside pass rush flexibility, this seems a tick high, but like, he's a heck of a football player,
like kind of guy that if he falls to 29, you're not surprised if Washington takes him because that's Adam Peters kind of guy.
Yeah, 100%.
Zabel, the tackle from North Dakota State at 26 to the Rams. Nick Scorton, an edge from Texas A&M, goes to Baltimore. Jahad Campbell, 28 to Detroit, as we talked about a little bit earlier. Then after we took Shamar Stewart for the Commanders at 29, Jalen Walker, and then Trey Amos, Demetrius Knight. We talked a little bit about some of those guys, but you wanted to circle back on Walker.
Yeah, Walker is really interesting to me because like I've seen a lot of mocks with him super high and I don't really get it yet. And I probably got to watch some more film because he plays edge and he's a good edge. Plays off-ball like linebacker and he's a fine off-ball linebacker. His movement in space isn't great. So the thing with him is like, what are you actually at the next level? And that becomes problematic for me because, again, I think he's a good football player, but it's like, can you win on the edge consistently versus longer, bigger tackles? I don't know. And I don't think you can play off-ball linebacker. And I've heard Trevor Sikkema, who does this board and does these rankings, say similar things. And I think that's probably why he's down in this range for PFF. But a lot of people have him as a top 15 player. But an interesting guy to keep an eye on, especially after the combine.
I think there's a pretty good chance that I talk to Trevor in Indianapolis next week so we can talk about if you give me a list of guys to be like, Trevor, Logan wants to know what you think about this guy. I'll just turn my interview with Trevor into Logan's personal podcast. But I'll be in Indy next week. Be fun. Maybe, who knows? Actually, you know what? I'm going to text Trevor after we get done with this podcast, and I'm going to see if he wants to sit down, and maybe we'll record a podcast, the three of us, he and I together in Indy, and then we'll get you on the laptop since you don't get there till Thursday. Or we'll see if we can figure out the timing on Thursday to see if we can all get together because you owe me flight info, sir, which we'll take care of after this podcast, which is very soon because this podcast is basically over. We're going to do, obviously, a ton of draft stuff next week. The Combine, we got a bunch of stuff planned or a bunch of stuff that's like 90% baked. We just got to figure out the timing of it all. So we will get into that. Obviously, we're still taking mailbag questions as well if you'd like to submit. At Hoffman.sports or at Logan_Paulsen82 on Instagram or hit HoffmanShow.com. Use the contact link and it'll send me an email with your question. So we'll get back to the mailbag as we go. Obviously, on the backside of the Combine, huge free agency preview because, well, it's almost there. There's also a chance that some deals get done. If guys are re-signing, that stuff can kind of happen this week. We just saw Andy Dalton re-sign with the Carolina Panthers. So this kind of stuff can happen, before the opening of the league year, depending on teams' cap situations and all that kind of stuff. So we're on the lookout for news as well. If there's anything that happens with imminence, we'll be talking about it on the radio on the Hoffman Show from 4 to 7 as well. Check us out on the Team 980. For Logan, I'm Craig. Thanks so much for listening to this edition of Take Command. We'll see you next time live from Indianapolis. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.